When we last left off, we were discussing the differences between the lines of genealogy across the continent of Asia and how those populations relate to those in the Americas. There are obviously genetic parallels between the Mongoloid types in ancient America and the continent of Asia. But what are the differences between them? Before analyzing the difference between the Amerindian and the East Asian, it must be noted the diversity between the people of the entirety of the Eurasian continent is unmistakable. Yet the relationships they share with each other have explicit origins of commonality. Bloodlines are paramount in deciding a connection among common ancestors, and those relationships express themselves not just through physical features, but culturally as well. Proto-Indo-European mythology is the body of myths and stories associated with Proto-Indo-Europeans, the hypothetical speakers of the reconstructed Proto-Indo-European languages. Although these stories are not directly attested, they have been reconstructed by scholars of comparative mythology based on the similarities in the belief system of various Indo-European peoples. Various schools of thought exist regarding the precise nature of Proto-Indo-European mythology, which do not always agree with each other. The main mythologies used in comparative reconstruction are Vedic, Roman, and Norse, often supported with evidence from the Baltic, Celtic, Greek, Slavic, and Hittite traditions as well. Well-attested myths of the Proto-Indo-Europeans include a myth involving a storm god who slays a multi-headed serpent that dwells in water, and a creation story involving two brothers, one of whom sacrifices the other to create the world. They also believed in a world tree, bearing fruit of immorality, either guarded or gnawed on by a serpent or dragon, and tended by three goddesses who spun the thread of life. The debate on the origins of the Rig Veda and the Aryans in India is not new. It is not so much a scholarly dispute as much as an unending controversy. Quote, "It is widely believed that the Aryans came from Central Asia and massacred the indigenous people. Skeletal remains found at Harappa and other sites are often cited as evidence. It has been established that those skeletons belong to different time periods, which proves there was no massacre. Even in terms of genealogy, continuity can be seen over thousands of years, dismissing any invasion theory. Even in terms of genealogy, continuity can be seen over thousands of years, dismissing any invasion theory." End quote. Much before the Indus Valley civilization, the plains of India had a flourishing culture of its own, which can be established through the Rig Vedic text. The history needs correction and chronology needs to be fixed. End quote. This mutatis mutandis denial on behalf of European scientists and linguists doesn't negate the fact that even traditionally, the earliest derivatives of their culture were a repackaging of older cultures in the Indus Valley. As described by folklore professors, much of Norse and Aryan mythology began much further south from the people cast into the gutters of the class system. So even the widest Aryan Nordic mythology is steeped in dark Dravidian roots from the footprint of Asia. But beyond the cultural similarities and the genetic similarities between seemingly different people, Eurasia is the home to more than just these various forms of Caucasian genetics. Quote, "From the combined landscape of Denisovan and Neanderthal ancestry in present-day humans." Quote, Some present-day humans derive up to 5% of their ancestry from archaic Denisovans, an even larger proportion than the 2% from Neanderthals. We developed methods that can disambiguate the locations of segments of Denisovan and Neanderthal ancestry in present-day humans and applied them to 257 high-coverage genomes from 120 diverse populations, among which were 20 individual Oceanians with high Denisovan ancestry. In Oceanians, the average size of Denisovan fragments is larger than Neanderthal fragments, implying a more recent average date of Denisovan admixture in the history of these populations. We document more Denisovan ancestry in South Asia than is expected based on existing models of history, reflecting a previously undocumented mixture related to archaic humans. Denisovan ancestry, just like Neanderthal ancestry, has been deleterious on a modern human genetic background, as reflected by its depletion near genes. Finally, the reduction of both archaic ancestries is especially pronounced on chromosome X and in near genes more highly expressed in testes than other tissues. This suggests that reduced male fertility may be a general feature of mixtures of human populations diverged by greater than 500,000 years. Recent genomic research has shown that hybridization between substantially diverged lineages is the rule, not the exception, in human evolution. However, the importance of hybridization in shaping the genotype and phenotype of Homo sapiens remains debated. Here, we argue that current evidence for hybridization in human evolution suggests not only that it was important, but it was an essential creative force in the emergence of our variable adaptive species. We then extend this argument to a reappraisal of the archaeological record, proposing that the exchange of cultural information between divergent groups may have facilitated the emergence of cultural innovation. We discussed the implications of this divergence and hybridization model for considering the taxonomy of our lineage. Currently, the term modern humans or modern Homo sapiens is used exclusively in the paleoanthropological and archaeological literature to refer to people emerging from Africa, i.e., people of African origin. However, we know that Neanderthals and Denisovans are part of many people's ancestry today, raising the question of whether it is valid to exclude them from our species. Considered another way, if you send your cheek swab in to learn your ancestry and find out you are 10% Neanderthal, it will be nonsense to say that you are 90% modern human. Additionally, given the increasing genetic and morphological evidence for hybridization emerging from the fossil record, it is likely that the assignment of certain individuals to current taxonomic categories is impossible. It is almost certain that individuals previously defined as modern humans are actually hybrids, as recently argued on the basis of both genetics and morphology. Defining Homo sapiens has always been problematic. Relying on shared derived characteristics such as big brain and language abilities does not incontrovertibly exclude groups like Neanderthals, who also had large brains and may have had comparable cognitive abilities. Using a common approach for determining affinities of fossils, i.e. phenotype, within close or to the range of humans living today is also problematic, given that today's range includes the effects of hybridization, as discussed here. More pointedly, even traits acquired through hybridization are modern in a sense that they contribute to the range of variation seen in people living today. We suggest at this time, until more is known about phenotypic and genomic variation in Pliocene groups, that considering Homo sapiens as a single complex lineage with significant divergence and anastomosis among subgroups is the most inclusive and accurate approach. We would like to see the elimination of the term modern humans in exchange for simply calling our taxon Homo sapiens, with people alive today referred to as living humans. We would recommend that researchers consider everyone prior to living people who contributed directly to the variation in our lineage as human ancestors with regional population names like Denisovans and Europeans, rather than giving them species level distinctions. We recommend this last measure because referring to Neanderthals versus modern humans gives the incorrect impression that certain human groups living today are less modern than others. Were these ancestral groups distinct species? Most evolutionary biologists agree that species should be so called if they retain morphological, behavioral, and genetic differences even in the face of gene flow. And certainly Africans and Neanderthals likely remained divided over a geologically short evolutionary time period due to geographic barriers, becoming distinct lineages in isolation. Humans living today represent a genomically coherent species. Whether which ancient Homo taxa can be considered monophyletic, genomically coherent species will have to await sequences of numerous genomes from across the range of their distribution. However, this description of what keeps species distinct also implies the ability to coexist geographically without the fusion of lineages is a result of being separate species. Indeed, post-contact gene flow and the subsequent disappearance of all but a single lineage suggest that these archaic lineages may not have been able to coexist without the fusion of lineages. Across the board, research indicates that contrary to the narratives involving the caves of Western Europe, it is the East Asian who possesses the highest amount of Neanderthal DNA and not the classic Caucasoid. These archaic bloodlines, however, aren't the only older bloodlines present in modern-day Asia. Denisovan DNA is found in parts of Southeast Asia, with a distinct contrast between the ancestry of Australia and Southeast Asia. Despite many of the obvious differences between the Caucasian, the Mongoloid, and the Aboriginal Australian, and the distinct similarities between the Aboriginal Australian and the African, it seems as though the actual relationship between the Caucasian, Mongoloid, and Australoid is more than meets the eye. Quote, "We conclude that the ancestors of this Aboriginal Australian man, and possibly of all Aboriginal Australians, are as distant from Africans as are other Eurasians, and that the Aboriginal ancestors split 62 to 70,000 years BP from the gene pool that all contemporary non-African populations appear to descend from." End quote. According to this team of geneticists, Aboriginal Australians are more closely related to Eurasians than Negroes from Africa. Islands of the Indian and Pacific Ocean cover a variation of distinctive geographical regions unlike any other locations on Earth. The geography that sets the islands of Oceania apart make these spectacular landscapes as diverse as the people who inhabit the islands. Quote, "The Wallace Line is a biogeographic boundary that separates the Asian animals from the Australian ones, named after naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace, who noticed a sudden change in fauna after crossing the 20-mile strait between the Indonesian islands of Bali and Lombok. The native species on the islands were dictated by the land masses they were originally connected to. Islands west of the Wallace Line have animals of Asian origin. The first true island of the Australian mainland was Lombok. Islands east of Lombok have species of Australian origin. Although there is geographic proximity between these islands, there is great diversity among the plants, animals, and people. Geneticists have long remarked regarding the ethnic diversity among such a relatively close group of inhabitants. The genetic cluster of admixture held within the genome of the South Pacific Islands shows that even the most remote locations of the world have traces of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA, yet embody the physical characteristics more along the lines of modern Negroes. In Melanesians, there is an elevated amount of Denisovan DNA. It is estimated that 5% of the genome of Melanesians derived from Denisovan ancestry. Conversely, Denisovan DNA is absent from Western European and African populations. As well, Melanesians have comparably the same amount of Neanderthal admixture as do other populations of non-African origin. But to add to the genetic landmine, included in the Melanesian bloodstream is a trace of a completely different humanoid species that isn't carried by any other group on Earth. This rare concoction of blood make the Melanesians a considerable target for genetic research. Polynesian people, the people who inhabit the smaller islands further out in the remote areas of the Pacific, are closely related to Southeast Asians. Even more compelling, genetic markers indicate that Polynesians and Hawaiians belong to haplogroup C and O predominantly, but they are not in haplogroup Q, which is the representative haplogroup for Amerindian or Native American populations. Meaning that although there is clear Mongoloid resemblance, there is no direct descendant that can be genetically ascertained beginning with the Mongols in Polynesia being the predecessors to the Mongols of America. Similarly to the Melanesians who resemble African Negroes, the Polynesian and Amerindian may resemble each other in likeness, but the genetic differences between the two groups indicate no direct relation. In fact, Polynesians are genetically closer to Melanesians than Amerindians. Genetic markers also indicate that the common ancestral link of Polynesians and American Indians is traced to Central Asia by way of Siberia. This information means that Amerindian bloodlines in North and South America are descendants of or related to Mongoloid populations in Siberia. Now we can see the parallel between populations that prompted scientists to focus on the Bering Strait as the track in which the Americas was first populated. But this theory leads to many areas of contention. Why are the Amerindian populations in the Americas genetics so much older? If it was the case that migration began in Asia and ended in America, why are East Asians and Siberians considered Neo-Mongoloid? And why are Amerindians considered Paleo-Mongoloid? As you will continue to read publication after publication, one thing will become clear. The relationship between Asia and America is only told one way. Asians, more accurately Siberians, migrated from Asia to the Americas via the Bering Strait, and before that, migrating from Central Asia to Siberia, and before that, migrating out of Africa. But is this narrative true? We are making breakthroughs in terms of understanding the true history as it concerns evolution, or more specifically, the hybridization of man into mankind. Although there are visible variations in appearance between the people of Asia, there is a hidden genetic connection between every shade of Eurasian, from the edge of Spain and North Africa to the fringes of the remote Pacific Islands. All these people can be traced to the same progenitors out of Central Asia. In terms of archaic admixture, the Neanderthal bloodlines across the continent predominate throughout the lighter races, especially in East Asia, throughout Western Europe, while Denisovan DNA is found in isolated locations within the Pacific and Melanesian islands among the darker races, and virtually non-existent on the continent of Africa. Conversely, darker skin color is not an indication of an elevated level of Neanderthal DNA. Darker races in the Pacific Islands have higher levels of Neanderthal DNA compared to most Europeans, which means that these specific populations in the Pacific Islands are genetically more closely related to Neanderthals and Denisovans than other people around the world. This information further confirms that archaic populations could mate with humans and create several different types of hybrid species. more we uncover from the earth via archaeology, and the more we discover in the realm of genetic research, the more we learn that the presupposed migration theories propped by science and history are seriously flawed. Both out of Africa and the Bering Strait theories have done extreme damage to human understanding of the past, and now science will slowly admit that they were wrong. As a way of saving face in a world that is becoming harder to deceive. Some of the world's most trusted institutions in society will soon lose all credibility when it is discovered that they have been lying about everything, and now we can prove it. But how can we prove it? These questions and more on the next episode of The Smartest Beast in the Field.